Play Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. This week, Dusty dives into the self-titled EP by Scratch Acid, which dropped in 1984.
Long live Noise. Long live the Jesus Lizard.
Oh yeah, we're gonna really get into noise rock lore, which I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah, it's something I've fallen more and more in love with as time has gone on. Like, I think when you get older, you're supposed to want to quiet it down, but I'm just, the noisier, the better. So I'm really into it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like in my older age, I'm getting louder and weirder rather than quieter and more normal. So, yeah.
Maybe we're just going deaf and we really need to crank it up. The tinnitus is really something.
Well, let's get into it. This is Dusty on Scratch Acid's self-titled EP on the Cobain 50.
I'm going to let the singer of Scratch Acid set the scene for us.
The people that listen to alternative music, if they were to find us abrasive, I think that would be hilarious. Yeah. Because, according to the people who listen to alternative music, their definition of alternative music is probably abrasive.
If you've been following along the Cobain 50 through this point, your ears have surely heard many abrasive sounds and personalities, whether that be the fiery punk of bands like Black Flag, or the off-putting rhythms of the Shags.
The short people want what the tall people's got, and the tall people want what the short people's got.
It's become pretty evident that Kurt Cobain loved abrasiveness in all forms. Not that you couldn't have guessed that to begin with. Harsh noise, cantankerous personalities, feedback, more noise, noise, noise.
All the noise.
Kurt certainly had a type, so to speak. Perhaps no band on the list fits the bill better for abrasiveness than Austin, Texas noise rockers, Scratch Acid. Kurt obviously evangelized many of the bands he loved, but Scratch Acid is one that came up especially often. In the Kurt Cobain biography, Heavier Than Heaven, Charles Cross reflects how Kurt had massive gaps in his musical knowledge in the early days of Nirvana. Like how Kurt didn't know Patti Smith or the New York Dolls, but he could tell you everything about Scratch Acid. They meant that much to him. Cross also recalls an early Nirvana show, which was a birthday party for Gilly Hayner of Calamity Jane. Kurt joined her on stage to sing Scratch Acid's The Greatest Gift. But it wasn't just the fact that the band was noisy that appealed to Kurt. In the 2006 documentary About a Son, there's audio from an interview with Kurt and friend of the podcast, Michael Azerrad, in which he shares how Scratch Acid spoke to him personally.
At that time, hardcore was totally dead. Speed metal was the next big thing, and I hated that shit. And the only thing to do was either be real quirky and new wave like we were at the beginning. The reason I like Scratch Acid so much was because they had, structure to their songs, real simple pop structure that you could follow real easily, and it was almost like an Aerosmith song, but it was really f***ed up, and that's what I was doing, and that's what I wanted to do.
Before the members of Scratch Acid came together in 1982, they were already a part of Austin's vibrant punk scene. The same scene that birthed bands like MDC, Big Boys, and Butthole Surfers.
I don't mind the sun sometimes, the images it shows.
If you're squeamish hearing that name now, just wait until we get to the episode where we talk about not one, but two of their albums.
Sugary and softly spoken lies. You never know just how to look through other people's eyes.
But anyway, punk scenes, especially in the 80s, were known for their DIY spirit. Austin had this in spades. Venues like Raoul's held regular jams where anyone could come up, scream, shred, break shit, whatever. It's actually where Dave Dichter from MDC got his first start, if you recall that episode from earlier in the series. Same goes for Scratch Acid vocalist David Yow, the guy we heard from earlier. He was drawn to our rules after reading a piece about the place getting raided by police in Rolling Stone magazine. In Greg Beats' oral history of Scratch Acid for the Austin Chronicle in 2006, Yow reflected on a particular time that he saw the Huns play a show there. He says it completely changed the way he thought music should be presented. For his part, future Scratch Acid bassist Brett Bradford came to Austin via Dallas. He recalls how joining a punk band in Austin was almost second nature. In that same piece for the Austin Chronicle, which we'll reference a lot here, Bradford remembered putting up a flyer at Inner Sanctum Records, seeking a guitarist for a new project, then turning around and running directly into Chris Wing of the band Sharon Tate's Baby and telling him, "Oh, we're looking for a guitarist." Not long after that, they'd bring in Ray Washam on drums and rename the band Jerry's Kids. They'd taken a bunch of acid and jammed together through a particularly bad flood in Austin on Memorial Day in 1981. Right after their jam session, they decided to go save lives and went out into the storm. As the band recalls in the oral history, supposedly they actually did save some people in trapped cars, even as they were tripping balls. Yow found himself playing bass in the band Toxic Shock, a short-lived group alongside vocalist Steve Anderson. The group only played several times and recalled not being well received. They said they were spit on and had trash thrown at them at a show they played with Butthole Surfers. At the time, Yow was living in a house with roommate David William Sims, a true Austin local. As Toxic Shock was ending, so was Jerry's Kids. Bradford and Washam asked Yow if he wanted to try playing bass in a new band, what became Scratch Acid. They'd later bring in Anderson as well on vocals. Sims says he more or less invited himself into the band as a second guitarist, telling Austin Chronicle that he, quote, just kind of made a pest of myself by showing up and acting like I was in the band, until I was. Scratch Acid was Sims's first band.
Blast with the body, curse with the blood, and I put a bear, and I could a chain, I tore the kill, I wish for the dead, I pray for sex, an unused bed, killing ambition, the
The name Scratch Acid was purely meant to be provocative with its drug association and the visceral feel of a scratch. As they began to imagine what the band could be, they centered around the idea of being their own favorite band. They wanted to create a live show that lived up to the unhinged mayhem that they loved from their peers in Big Boys and the Butthole Surfers. The band would make their debut on January 20th, 1983, at Austin's Studio 29. Well, most of them did at least. The group booked the show without telling Anderson, their vocalist, and only played 3 instrumental songs. This was their way of showing him out of the group. Anderson told Austin Chronicle that, in the end, the band made the right choice. For his part, Anderson went on to become a pioneering figure in the craft brewing beer scene before he sadly passed away in 2015. With Anderson out, the group needed to restructure. Yow moved from bass to vocals, and Sims moved to bass. They'd take a second stab at a first show in March of 1983 at the Skyline Club, opening for TSOL, Big Boys, and, of course, Butthole Surfers. Like I said, get used to it. Somebody handed out 100 half hits of acid for free, making for a memorable experience for many. Presumably. The band took a brief hiatus when Washam took over drums in the band Big Boys, but then Scratch Acid got back together in 1984. It wasn't long before they were approached by a new indie label that wanted to sign the band, Rabid Cat Records. Scratch Acid holed up at Earth and Sky Studio and performed their 8 songs live. Washam recalls when they listened back to the tapes, they said, "Fuck, man, is that how we sound? That's pretty interesting." The band was buzzing after finding out that they were actually really good. Whatever they were doing, it was coming naturally. As Yow told Songfacts in 2014, Cannibal, the opening track on Scratch Acid's debut EP, was actually the first song he ever wrote. Yow had just gone through a bad breakup, which fueled his writing on the record. Yow's lyrics were vivid and occasionally disturbing, like the terrifying Lay Screaming, which is far too graphic to play here, or Monsters, which, well, is also disturbing. And his vocal performances were wild. Sure, there's lots of tonsil erupting screams, but Yow would take it to the next level. Sometimes a much grosser level. You'd hear coughs, puking, snot, and hawking loogies. Against the frenzied noise of Bradford's primordial riffs, Sims' devilish pounding bass, and the unrelenting fury of Washam's drums, Scratch Acid was an insane beast of a band. The world finally got to know this beast when Scratch Acid released their debut self-titled EP in July of 1984. And when I say the world, I really just mean people who were very in touch with the punk underground. When Rabid Cat Records released the record, its reach was limited. The band didn't know how to promote and later admitted they probably should have done more than just leaning on the label. Everyone was learning as they went. But over time, word of mouth took over. The band began to tour, and their riveting live performances won people over. Zines and college radio stations began buzzing about the EP. Scratch Acid only ever released one proper full-length album. That was 1986's Just Keep Eating. Their underground popularity was rising, and they would eventually sign to the famed Touch and Go Records. They even landed some huge gigs, like opening up for the Ramones and Public Image Limited. Yow recalls Johnny Rotten refusing to let the band have any of their beer backstage. So, as he told Austin Chronicle, quote, "While Public Image was playing, we took all their beer, all their booze, and all their yummy food items, stuck them in our van, and drove away." On tour behind the EP, the band said their Seattle show in particular was massively sold out. Yow recalls people being outside who couldn't get in, so they pressed their ears against the wall to try and hear the set. He also remembered, quote, "There was a guy having problems getting in. I went outside and someone said, 'Hey, this guy's having trouble getting in. Can you put him on the list?' I said, 'Sure.' It ended up being Mark Arm from Mudhoney." After a few years of touring, the band became irritable with one another, getting to the point where they would argue on stage. After a particularly tense European tour in 1986, the band called it quits.
I was happy and comfortable, so comfortable with my friends and family.
After the band ended, most of the members went their separate ways. Bradford worked on an array of projects like Great Caesar's Ghost, Sandre de Toro, and Areola 51. Washam was in steady demand for his drumming, getting back together with local heroes the Big Boys, and performing stints with Ministry and Tad. After Sims collaborated a bit with Steve Albini, he got back together with Yow in 1989 to form another formative noise rock group, the Jesus Lizard. The Jesus Lizard feels like an extension of Scratch Acid's legacy. The group only upped the ante in terms of performance, with Yow frequently finding himself getting beaten up by the crowd, getting a hit in the head with bottles, and, according to the Chicago Reader, one time even set the stage on fire. The group built a friendship with a band led by one of their own superfans, Nirvana. In a feature for ABC News, Yow recalls a backstage encounter with a sheepish Kurt Cobain.
Kurt came walking up and he said, "Hey, is it cool if we play before you guys?" And we were all like, "Ha, ha, ha, ha." And he said, "Well, I've seen you, and I'd really rather play before you guys." And we're going, "No, that's not going to happen." But, you know, he told me that he was a fan. It's nice when soon-to-be dead people think you're cool.
Nirvana and the Jesus Lizard would also put out a split single with Nirvana's Oh the Guilt on one side
Seems to think, she seems to weak, she takes a week, get over it. She likes to see, she likes to see, she likes to think she has all of it. She likes the sound, she likes the sound, she likes to stand, she can't afford to sit.
and the Jesus Lizard's Puss on the other. The ties between Scratch Acid and Jesus Lizard run deep with Nirvana. Sometimes going through these records, doing all of our research, there's not always a clear statement or cover from Kurt about these albums. But with these projects in particular, it's clear where Kurt stood. He was a loud fan through and through. It's something bandmate Chris Novoselic recognized as well. Nearly 2 decades later, when he and Grohl were considering doing a reunion performance, Novoselic first asked Yow if he would take Kurt's place. Here's Yow in late 2024 talking about it on the Creative Control podcast.
Chris Novoselic emailed me and said, hey, we need to talk. And he and Pat Smear and Dave Grohl were going to do this experience music thing in Seattle. And it was going to be the first time they would have played together since Kurt killed himself. And Chris wanted me to be the singer. He said that he thought that Kurt would want me.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I was pretty blown away by that. But I said, well, happily.
Yow goes on to say that he asked his former bandmates in the group Qui to give him singing lessons to prepare for the gig. But ultimately, the performance never happened. Why? Well, according to Yow,
when it got closer to the time that it was going to happen, Dave Grohl said, no, I don't want David Yow. I want like Paul McCartney and Neil Young and shit like that. And they ended up not having any, but they just had girls.
This became the legendary Rock and Roll Hall of Fame performance, where the band was fronted by Lord, St. Vincent, Joan Jett, and Kim Gordon. But if you have ever wanted to hear Yow sing Nirvana songs, here he is doing Smells Like Teen Spirit with the Melvins at a show in Chicago in the year 2000. As for Scratch Acid, their story continues. Since the initial breakup, they've reunited twice. They got back together in 2006 as a part of Touch and Go's 25th anniversary celebration and did a brief stint of shows, including a finale here in Seattle at the Showbox. They'd later get back together in 2012, chosen by Jeff Mangum of Neutral Milk Hotel as a part of his curated lineup for the All Tomorrow's Party Festival in the United Kingdom. They would end up touring just before that performance in 2011. Scratch Acid are a great example of the domino effect of underground music. The underground heroes who inspire more underground heroes, who inspire the next breakthrough success, who inspires a world of musicians. That a band who called an album Just Keep Eating can be a part of this creative snowball is both profoundly funny and profoundly profound. The creative who gives a spirit of Scratch Acid is something that we all could stand to embrace.
And that was my co-host and good friend Dusty Henry on Scratch Acid's self-titled EP from 1984. Tell me about when you first heard this and what were your initial thoughts, because I feel like your initial thoughts may be different from your thoughts on this band now.
Yeah, definitely. I was not an early adopter of noise rock. Initially, I think Nirvana was maybe the noisiest I was going initially around that time. And even that is that was most of what I listened to was a lot more stripped back, acoustic-y, folky kind of stuff. That being said, as time has gone on, as we referenced, I've only gotten noisier and wanted to push my eardrums to the maximum. And this is a great band for that. I think back then when I first listened to it, like, nah, this is just noise.
Mhm.
But now, like, I find a lot of beauty in the noise. Like, as you know, I spend a lot of time with like listening to ambient music, which is just so much, droning, and it's in many ways you would think it's the opposite of noise rock, but I find that to be like kind of close cousins.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like that something getting lost and immersed in the noise, and like that static is very akin to like a Brian Eno type of record to me. And that said too, like there is like, this isn't just straight up noise. There's lots of great melody and even some sort of like country western a little bit in there a little bit, which I'm, as a fan of the Meat Puppets, always down for.
I will say that much like you, the first time I heard Scratch Acid, I wasn't really into it. But also, I think of being a Nirvana fan as a child and getting to Endless Nameless or even a lot of the stuff from Bleach and like it not speaking to me personally. But yeah, as time grows on, people like us, we get louder and weirder. So I'm definitely more into it now. And I hear the influence on not just Nirvana and, songs like Endless Nameless, but also so many other bands. Like I'm thinking of like Big Black or Piss Jeans, even like bands from the last 20, 30 years that are still tent poles in the community that I belong to, which is the American punk scene.
Yeah, exactly. Noise rock, it calls punk's bluff, I think, on loudness. It's like, okay, you guys think that's loud. Like, let's jump it up a little bit and see how far that goes. And it's almost like literally, like how much can we blow out the sound? How much are the levels gonna peak and look like a wall of sound?
Yeah.
Which I love. And yeah, you could see that like how, I don't know, a group like Death Grips or something where it's this blown out thing. It invited a new texture into modern music, I think, as it started in the underground. And like as often happens, a band like Nirvana kind of brings a little bit of that up and other bands take it from there. Like I can hear it like from Nirvana to like honestly like Charlie XCX like a little bit.
Oh
that's not a noise record, but like it's really blown out at times. Like the bass and the riffs are just kind of like scratchy, and it's like I'm not saying that Charlie listened to Scratch Acid. Shout out to Charlie, she was. That's awesome if you did. But kind of like we talk about emo, that downstream influence and the game of telephone that happens. That I think noise rock or noise music has slightly infiltrated a lot of the popular music we listen to.
Are we Brat? Is the Cobain 50 Brat? Am I with the zeitgeist instead of being a grouchy old head?
You finally did it, Martin. You're Brat now. We were just a year late on it, but
but yeah, seriously, going into the idea of like noise rock, I've mentioned my book club in the past, and we recently finished reading Thurston Moore's memoirs, Sonic Life. Shout out to Thurston. I did an interview with him. If you would like to check it out on A Deeper Listen,
so
cheap plug. Anyway, I've also spoken about a good friend of mine, almost like a father figure, Paul, who came into Thurston's memoirs with the question, like, what is it about noise that appeals to your generation? Because, he's in his 60s. And, he was talking about like being into the Byrds, the Stones, and kind of like the Sex Pistols being the most extreme thing that he had gotten into as far as music. And then like once the tide shifted to bands like Sonic Youth, he was like, I don't get it. It's, it's noise, it's non-musical. And it's much like, what do you do to push the sound forward? What can you do when it feels like everything has been done? Punk's dead, whatever. You go a different route. You do something more extreme. And that's what I love about the rise of Scratch Acid and their innovation, and also the Jesus Lizard. I mean, we might as well talk about the Jesus Lizard for a bit, because I feel as though they were even more influential than Scratch Acid.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, again, making tons of assumptions here, that I feel if Kurt had written this list at a different time, there'd be like a Jesus Lizard record here.
Oh,
in this
absolutely.
place. Yeah. And obviously Nirvana and Jesus Lizard, they did split singles together, I think toured together.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just kind of like, again, this iteration, right? Like, continue to iterate on even on themselves, like with David Yow kind of going in a new direction, and how closely like Kurt and grunge wanted to hold that to what they were doing, which I feel like is like really cool move and a nod to, you know, we're existing now in this mainstream top 40 radio world, but we're still down with Jesus Lizard. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about Jesus Lizard and their influence, I think about how they basically kept the lights on at Touch and Go.
Yeah.
And they slotted in so nicely with bands like Big Black. And between Jesus Lizard and Big Black, they kind of influenced what I like to call the Chicago sound for decades and decades. And still to this day, I have friends who are in bands that sound like Scratch Acid and Jesus Lizard.
Yeah. And one thing I love about this record too is, like I mentioned a little bit before, the kind of country western elements. And that's something I think I've noted about Kurt in the past too. Again, I feel like there's this like rural Washington accent that if you're from here, you know it.
Yeah.
And Kurt totally has that, and you can hear it in some of his songs. And I love when it shows up here. I mean, the band, he's from Texas, so of course it's natural.
Right.
But I think there's an element of that like it adds to the appeal, not just in terms of people who like this kind of music, but it really sets up a band like Nirvana to break through. We talk about Nirvana bringing punk to the masses. Like the masses includes dudes driving big trucks with Primus stickers on it. Like, no shade, that's where I grew up. But, you know, you can have punk music that's infusing these elements that like, quote unquote, working class people are into. Like that's like my family, you know, that we could unite on this, and you can get punk ideals with this sound that is familiar and part of like Americana.
Right. And like you mentioned, Scratch Acid originated in Texas, Austin, Texas, to be exact. And I think in terms of that, it brings to the fore for me how punk music and music in general is very much a regional style, a regional art form, how various music from wherever you are in the world sounds like the place it came from. And so I think about the Texas punk bands like Scratch Acid, like Meat Puppets, like Butthole Surfers, who we will cover later in the series, who take the elements of the dominant culture of where they're from and they put their own weird spin on it, which is the very basis of art. We talk a lot about how the music scene is flattening because of streaming, of being able to upload your album on Bandcamp, about everything from everywhere being so accessible. But I think there is still this idea that music is still regional and you can't help to sound like where you're from. Like, you know, Kurt Cobain's rural Washington accent.
Exactly. It's like punk ideology is like the base ingredient, and then all these bands are adding their own piece to it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it exciting and beautiful, that like you get a little different flavor of Texas punk versus Seattle punk versus DC punk versus UK punk. Like it's gonna reflect the mood, the feeling, the sights, the sounds of those areas. And that's, I don't know. We are the world of punk.
Special shout out to our number one fan and our pal Lucas.
Yes, Lucas.
Lucas is a listener from Seattle, and he is such a huge fan of the Cobain 50. He sent us an email a while back that really touched both of us. And this idea that a 16-year-old kid looks forward to our podcast every week where we talk and rant and, go really deep and get really nerdy about mostly obscure music. I mean, there's only been a couple mainstream albums on this list, is incredible. And it makes me feel like the future is bright.
I wholeheartedly agree. Again, big shout out to Lucas. He has a great blog himself, handsomeboywrites.org. He's doing his own kind of version of the Cobain 50, going through his cat Raven's top albums.
Yes, shout out to Raven. Raven, one of the last real music critics.
Yeah.
Like I have to say, Raven could have my job if Raven could talk.
Absolutely. It's some of the most fun and exciting music journalism I've been seeing. Lucas, you're the man. It was great to meet you recently down here at the studio, and we look forward to crossing paths again soon.
Yes. Also, supplementary shout out to everybody who listens to the Cobain 50 on Reddit. I hear that it's a big community of you on Reddit that listen to us and talk about our show. So yeah, shout out to y'all too. This piece was produced by Dusty Henry. Audio is mixed by Roddy Nikpour. Special shout out to Isabel Khalili and Dusty Mizell. And Larry Mizell Jr. is our director of editorial.
If you like the noise we're making and want to keep supporting that, you can give a donation, KEXP.org/Cobain, become a monthly recurring amplifier, or give a one-time donation. Anything you can do is appreciated. And even if you can't, again, thanks for just being here with us. This has been an awesome journey in the Cobain 50, all KEXP Editorial. We can't do what we're doing without your support. So, as always, eternal gratitude.
And now we're really going to get out of here. I'm Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. We'll see you next week on the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters. There are some surprisingly ideal times to go to Costco gas.
Yeah.
Middle of the day on a weekday, it's usually pretty good. If you go after the lunch rush, that works out pretty well for me. And oddly, we found going to Costco gas on the weekends isn't so bad. You'd think it would be crazy because it's like a knife fight in the parking lot with everyone else, but everyone else is so focused on getting in the store that usually we just drive right up.